Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to yet another edition of the Lambom Show. And today we begin a new journey. We begin a new program. We begin a new edition. Every day is a new day. Every week is a new week. Today we want to talk about men and mental health. There is a general sentiment that men are strong. While physiologically this may be true, this has been translated into healthcare. Men are said to be brave and should sweat it through. The emancipation of women has brought about a proliferation of concerns of women and engendered a lot of this, and rightly so. I will be called sexist if I talked of women as being the weaker sex, and rightly so, or describing them as much more fragile. Yet, we must admit that women's issues are much more delicate and they pay much attention or more attention to their health than men. This translates even to the profession of nursing, where stereotypically many conceived of it as a profession for women. A male nurse was an aberration. But enough of that. There are few programs that talk about men's issues in general and men's health in particular. Men don't talk about such issues in public. We generally retire to quote unquote the Ngumba house, and there we can vent. Think of it. How many married men initiate conflict resolution with their wives through counseling sessions? Very often, women are the ones who seek out counseling and invite their spouses, who are often very unwilling to participate and actually take exception to that. It strikes at the heart of whatever our conception of masculinity is. While it may seem too generic and therefore a fallacy to paint all men with the same brush, it seems relevant to start having such conversations in public about some of the issues plaguing us men. And this is why we are beginning this program. Today, I read with so much pain the story of a Cameroonian man in Australia who committed suicide because he found out that his wife, whom he had brought in, was pregnant with twins by another man. Last year, there were stories of African men in the United States who killed their wives and killed themselves. Divorce rates are skyrocketing among African immigrants. Substance use disorder is also prevalent, and many are turning to drugs such as alcohol. Yes, alcohol is a drug. Marijuana, K2, and you name it. We must admit that life in bush, quote unquote, is not as rosy as many perceive it to be. There's so much stress, so much depression, so much anxiety, and you name it. Then what are our coping mechanisms? How are we handling these things? And while we want to seek solutions to these things, to these issues, it seems fitting to talk about the problems, because after all, identifying the problem and talking about the problem is halfway to its solution. Today, I'm privileged to have with me a friend and a brother who's based in the UK, BK. BK has been on this show before, and I want to thank him. I want to welcome him again for generously accepting to come and share his wisdom, to come and share all that he has learned this far since he initiated something called the Mindset Boulevard. Think about the word boulevard, wide, but it's not just your normal boulevard, it's about a mindset. That is what we are going to be about this program. Every Monday, we will be talking about these issues. Welcome, and I thank you all for joining. And BK, again, as always, thank you for offering generously with your time. Thank you for accepting to come and share with us. And I think we are privileged that we have both of us here, men, who are going to be talking about issues of and for men, and we are not saying that we are the best people to talk about this. We are going to share from our own wisdom, from our own experience, from our own wealth. And of course, this is not just for men. If you have a brother, you have a husband, you have a friend, you have a father, this program is also for you. And we are going to be inviting people from time to time. But BK, over to you, and thank you as always for dedicating your time to share with us.
Thank you, Lambert. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I'd like to say that it's more than a pleasure, it's an honor. You thank me, I'd rather thank you for opening your platform up to this initiative. You are one of those people who just inspire. You give of yourself, you give of your time. You want to serve a cause that is bigger than the self. You want to make a difference, and that is it's an example to emulate. So when you say thank me, I'd rather spit it on his head and I'll say thank you to you. And I want to thank our audience, or those on the platform, those who are here with us listening. I'd want to say a special thank you to you all, because you are the heroes. See, we're all here for a purpose, and that purpose is bigger than the self. We're here to make a difference, and there's no point succeeding alone. See, life's not really about what we do out there. It's not about what's happening outside of us. It's about what's happening within us. So I'm not sure how you want me to start this. I just suggest that we let it be organic. We have a conversation. We invite comments. Obviously, the audience are free to ask questions, to challenge us, to question, obviously. Question, challenge, make suggestions, give you ideas for other conversations, because obviously we're going to, as you said, Lambert, we're going to be having these conversations on a weekly basis. So where do I start? Let us start by looking at some of the things that you talked about. But before we do that, I don't know about the rest of our audience. I'm not sure what you subscribe to. I'm not sure what you believe in. Lambert and myself, we obviously come from a school, from a place where we believe in a greater power, in a greater being. And that is our inspiration, which means we do not represent ourselves today. We represent that ultimate force, and we make ourselves available as conduits that it may work through us and hopefully inspire you, so together we can grow, move from where we are to the place we are meant to be. So how do I usually start? Let's start by getting you all in the frame, And I would say, like Lambert and I, check your identity at the door as you walk in. Forget who you are, because that's usually where the problem starts. So let's just exchange energies and build synergy. Now, I can promise you that if you just show up, not as who you think you are, not as who you would love to be, just show up as energy, just show up as absolutely nothing. Why do I say so? Because from a place of nothingness, you have potential. And it is this potential that is infinite. It is from there that we can translate who we are into whatever we would like. Lambert, can I just check that you can still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. You talked about a number of things. You raised a number of issues. I want to start with strength. What is strong? Just bear with me. I'm going to have to turn that off. Yes, so you highlighted strength and weakness. VKC, nursing. We live in a world where strength It's not a static. Lambert, can you hear me?
You're breaking up, but let me just go ahead and check your lines for a second, then I'll come back to you in a minute. Let me just welcome a few people on. I want to welcome Quine Sam, my brother and friend in the Philippines. Thank you, he says, impressive. Tienche Jopa Kaba says, BK, watching from Tobago. And my sister, friend, Haiti Awambeng, thank you for coming. And again, you are listening to the Lambom Show. Today we are talking about men and mental health. And we just started off. The first thing that Coach BK said, I forgot to add that part of it. He's a coach, and it's very important. It's deliberately chosen, isn't it? It's a coach. It means the resources are all within. He's going to try to bring that out. And the first thing he has invited us all to do is just show up as nothing. Show up. The important thing is to show up. Just before you get into it, BK, you were talking about strength, but I wanted you to highlight, when you say show up as nothing, we carry lots of baggages around with us, isn't it? Why would I show up as nothing when I have so much load? I'm looking for a place to unload, which is actually part of the problem that most of us men have, isn't it? We don't know where to unload that. How do we show up as nothing?
Yes, so Lambert, this speaks to identity, if you ask my opinion. Who we are over the years, so we are driven to become something. We all aspire to achieve. Now, the question is, you would realize that our identity, however we choose to define ourselves at any point in time, becomes the substance that limits us. So we're limited by what we think we are. And that is just a figment of our imagination, because that doesn't represent our true identity. Now, let's say I showed up here as a brother. I would have a concept in my head. There's a certain concept of who or what a brother represents, and that is who I would try to be. Or if I showed up as a teacher or as a medical doctor, you notice I would have limited myself to a particular frame and to a particular frame. And I couldn't be free to be anything else. Now, the sad thing is, we look for fulfillment in these identities. When we can't find fulfillment in what it is we have defined ourselves to be, it brings the baggage, that emptiness. We try to express ourselves in a certain way, and it is never really enough. Now, when you show up, when you can forget what your experience is, you see, because our experiences per se are designed to help us become enlightened. And it is from this place of enlightenment that we can self-actualize. Now, if we become our experience, good or bad, if we define ourselves by our shortcomings, our successes, or our failures, then that is what we bring with us, and that is what we then try to project. Now, unfortunately, that is never really enough. So if you could show up without all the hurt, if you could show up without the pain, if you could show up without the expectations, see, because you could want to be seen in a particular way. You could want to be seen and described in a particular way, and that is what would then make your identity. And when you come with all that baggage, you're looking for people to acknowledge you, and so your message gets lost in all the contradictions that you bring at home. But if you can just show up, as I call it, energy, if you can just present yourself as absolutely nothing, you're not a teacher, you are not a student, you are just looking to interact, you're looking to engage, to build synergies, then you actually show up free. And from that place of freedom, you can be anything to anyone and to anybody.
So, BK, if I'm understanding you correctly, there are things that we presuppose or we want people to think that we are, defining marks of success. You are not asking us not to come along with our baggage, but to put everything out, isn't it? And do not let these things, seek to define our persons, because in defining ourselves based on that, we are limiting ourselves when there's a wealth of opportunity or there's a wealth of other things we could be considering. Okay. And it's kind of difficult. I work in a mental health facility, for example, and I'm a supervisor here. If I'm coming to this, why I've worked hard for this. Why should I not identify with that? Why should I? Is it not counterproductive to check something that I have worked hard for when I'm approaching this?
So that's a good question. The question I'd ask you is, what is that? When you say you're coming as a mental health professional, how do you define, how do you quantify and qualify that mental health professional? Is it what you have learned? Is it the experiences that you gathered before you got to that place? How exactly do you define it? Is the question I would ask you. And how does that limit you? Because if someone were to ask you a question that doesn't fall within the remit of who you have become based on your study or based on your career, but it's an area you're really apt and proficient in and confident in, what do? Are you going to shut down, or are you going to trust the power within to actually articulate who you are in a bigger way than your career, so to speak, or that thing that you believe you are defines you? So that is the question I would be asking you.
So again, I think there's a lot to unpack in there in terms of just not being defined by the degrees that one has had. Because again, if we go back to our experiences in the past, there are many of us who have those degrees, and there were degrees that we have not been able to use for any reason, isn't it? I'm talking to you today on a platform that I started off. How many years? I went to journalism school in 2012. That's when I graduated. But I'm doing something related to my profession how many years down the line, isn't it? So I'm not, where I am currently has nothing to do with what I studied in journalism. Nothing, absolutely. And I think that's the point, isn't it? In spite of what I studied, I've been able to get into a different avenue, and I'm maybe say excelling in it, even though I did not study that. Okay. And so I think it's both ways, bringing these together and saying, what is my experience? If I got that correct, experience leading to enlightenment and self-actualization.
Absolutely. And I would want to broaden that a tad bit so we really can put it all into perspective. When we talk about relationships, that is what this is really all about. So let's pick relationships apart. Let's uncouple it. Let's deconstruct the word. You would realize that life is all about relating. It means I do not exist until I start engaging and relating with you. That is actually what defines me. Because in my engaging with you and engaging in an open capacity, you get to bring out my strengths and my weaknesses. If I do not try from my weaknesses, because I'm open to them and I embrace them, then they become a source of strength for me. But for me to be able to do that, I need to be vulnerable. And that is a very important word. To be vulnerable. That is the space. That is the thing that allows us to be flexible, to be pliable, and to be versatile. If we are not vulnerable, there are certain places we wouldn't want to go. And if we do not go in these places, there is no way we can really self-actualize. Because in every situation, every experience we encounter, there is a teacher. The challenge is to find a teacher and to pick up the lesson. Now, what happens for the most part? I'd like to make an analogy here. I'm sure we are all familiar with candy. So typically when you get candy, the idea is you unwrap your candy, you eat the candy, and you throw the wrapping. But what do we typically do? Half the time, we take the candy, we unwrap it, we throw the candy away, and we eat the wrapping. So there's a role reversal of sorts there, which prevents us from self-actualizing, simply because there are certain paths we do not want to go. You talked about strengths, you talked about weaknesses. There are certain things. There are certain things that are defined, certain principles that we define, that we grow up with as kids, and they are almost natural. Nobody necessarily tells you, but just from observation, you realize that strength for men means you don't cry. It means you suck it up. You cry like a girl, you punch like a girl. Be a man. These are subliminal messages that we grow up with, and these are the things that define us. So anything which in any way, shape, or form presents as weak becomes a place we do not want to go. And usually these places are places of opportunity. So what happens when you grow up being significant? Because that is another word I'd like us to look at, another concept I'd like us to look at. See, because strength cuts across the fray, and it connects and chases us throughout life. Strength typically means success when you grow up. Strength, when you look at people who have got power and authority, it looks like, and who are successful, it always looks like they call the shots. Now, if they call the shots, as a younger person growing up in a community, especially the typical African community where you get to be seen and not heard, when you grow up in that environment, the people with power, respect, who can flex muscles and get things to happen, are usually the ones who have control. Now, as a young person, when I see that, what would I think? That person is loved, which means in order for me to be loved, I have to be strong. So when I give orders, they will be executed. Because if my orders are not executed, it means I'm not strong enough. Ergo, I'm not successful enough. That's a subliminal message that goes through. And so you go through life trying to emulate those who are powerful, those who can command respect. Whereas you look at mom, for instance, who usually typically would be the docile one, the submissive one in that engagement. You look at mom, you would realize that she's the one you go to when the going is tough. She's the one you go to when you need a cuddle. But by the same token, she's the one who hasn't got a voice. So it's almost like mommy is not loved. So weakness is associated with the absence of love and lack, whereas that strength and the ability to flex your muscles and to get things happening, it's almost has a connotative meaning that denotes strength. And we grow with that, and that's what we chase. So anything which is not strong and puts us in a position of power and so-called respect, which becomes twisted in our minds, because for the typical man, what does that translate into? It means if I ask you to do something and you do not do it the way I asked you to do it, then you do not respect me. So I feel like I'm not good enough. Why? Again, that is vulnerability. It is something that is in me, and I do not know that it is in me, that I carry it within me. So it is this energy that eats me from the inside. And I do my utmost best to look for activities, to look for trophies out in the world that will give me a sense of value and valor, that would elevate me and get me to a place where I can be respected, or I can feel respected, forgetting that what I'm looking for is actually in me. And if I can embrace and accept myself the way I am, then I will be able to show up wherever I go with my strengths and my weaknesses. And I won't see them as strengths or weaknesses. I will simply see them as opportunity. Everything becomes an opportunity and a stepping stone as opposed to a problem and an obstacle. Let's backtrack a bit. When I just started, I said I wanted to look at relationships in an all-encompassing way. You would realize that life is all about relating. We're either relating with people, places, situations, circumstances, processes, and all procedures. These people could be loved ones, they could be colleagues, they could be strangers, they could be acquaintances, or maybe your neighbor. Now, if all these relationships are working the way they should, then life is good. But if they are not, if we're failing in one area and we do not have the tenacity, the wherewithal to look at that area and ask ourselves, what is this trying to teach us? What is the opportunity here for me? Then we get stuck. And so you would realize that when you come to a conversation such as this one, you bring selective parts of you to that conversation, and you want to protect other parts of you, the parts where you think you are vulnerable. And so if someone were to ask you something that you did not know, what do? You lose your peace. That inner peace disappears. You become something else. You panic. You get into a frenzy. You're stressed. You get into distress. And you're in duress. And from that place, you can't function because you don't flow anymore. That energy is trapped within you. Your sense of worth is diminished. Again, why? Because you showed up as this thing that you're comfortable with. So showing up as a doctor, showing up as a teacher, showing up as a defined entity or quantity is not a problem in and of itself. It is when we identify or define ourselves as that entity and we derive our value and valor from that definition, that is what then limits us. Because we pretty much start trembling the moment a conversation is moving away from what we conceive of as our expertise. Let's bring this back into relationships. Since we're talking about men, mental health, and especially spousal relationships, the home, for instance, I dare say, and I'll make a broad-based statement, which is a compliment in many ways. So bear with me. Don't bite my head off just yet when I say this. I would say men are naive and women are ignorant. And that is the source of most of our problems. Relationships fall apart for these two main reasons. Men are naive and women are ignorant. What do I mean by men are naive? We all know that the man is the head of the family, and that is undisputed. It is incontestable. It is incontrovertible. You can have two people running a ship. But then again, when you look at it, you notice that if the man is the head, surely you do have a neck, and that is the woman. Now, show me the last time that the head did not turn in the direction of the neck, and I'll show you someone who's schizoid. It just does not happen. Some of us learned these lessons early on in life. And I want you to remind me about principles and values. So please take a mental note of that. So some of us learned these lessons very early on in life. And for me, what was that lesson? The lesson was simple. If mommy is okay, everyone is okay. If mommy is not in a good mood, there's no peace, there's no harmony. It can't be faked, it can't be feigned. Now, this is because women carry a certain power that is unbeknown to them. They are ignorant of this power that they carry on the inside. What do I mean by this ignorance? So before you start a relationship, typically, you have a man, the typical African setting. A man walks up to a woman and he lays his case. He shows an interest. Obviously, he falls in love with this woman because he saw qualities in the woman which were undeniably outstanding. And he wanted to be a part of that enterprise. And that is what got him there in the first place. Like I always say, Every man wants a strong woman, but not every man can handle a strong woman. And who is a strong woman? It's not strength as we define it. It is one who can be vulnerable. And what do I mean by vulnerability? One who will listen to you, understand your point of view, and their position if you're correct, without feeling like something of them or something in them has been diminished. This is something most men struggle with. So that is strength in you. And now, where did we start this conversation? We started with the man who saw this rose flower and wanted a part of it. So you see a woman who has got her head screwed on. She knows where she's going. She knows how to get there. She's got scruples. She's got values. She's got principles, mores, and ethos. And you love that, but you forget that behind that strength are these values and these morals that are a bit like thorns. You admire when these qualities are displayed out in the world and you see how they make everyone look at her in awe. She's respected. She's admired. She is uplifted and she's got presence and you want to be a part of that. So now what happens when you get close? Her principles and her values start working on you. You realize that although she would respond, she would show up, be at your beck and call, she is not a pushover. So what happens when this woman challenges you and she's not challenging you per se? See, because women want to connect. They always want to connect and build a community. They want to relate. And so a woman will correct you, not because she thinks she's better than you. She will correct you because she's seen potential in you and she's got that insight. Women intuit, which means they will say, do so, go in this direction. We men tend to have a lot of logic and reason because that is who we are. That's the way we're wired. We follow our senses for the most part. That is that's our awareness. So our awareness, our senses pretty much define what we know to be true. And that is driven by empirical evidence. For women, they are more spiritual naturally because they are nurturing, which means they will just know stuff. It's like the universe talks to them. Of course, I'm making generalizations here. There are exceptions both ways. So you see this woman who would tell you, let's do it this way, but she can't back it up. And you would bring out your bag of reasons, your logic, and all the empirical evidence to show that it should be done this way. Finally, she says, sure, go right ahead. Then you try it, and you hit a brick wall. You do it her way, it works. Now, when a woman sees a man with potential, all that man has to do is move away from his naiveness, thinking that he, as the fixer, should be the one with the voice 24/7. Do as I say, if you love me. I'm sure most men listening, even now, would resonate with that. We at some point, and this is where that naiveness comes in, and it is no fault of our own, but we grow up thinking, having this false concept of respect. Respect is, I command, I run the show. What I say goes. And when you grow up with that, because that's what you saw and that's what you know, because these are the people who seem to be in your world loved. You don't understand that people may not necessarily gravitate towards these successful people because they are loved, but we would gravitate towards them for what we can get off them, the fringe benefits that we can get off them. So we're happy to go on our knees and to do whatever it is we need to do in order to get a piece of the action. But the innocent child just watching things, that is love. So you grow with this misconception, these misguided principles, and then you try to implement that in your own home. That's where it usually starts. So you have the man who is fragile, and his definition of respect is thwarted, it is warped. So when he says do, or he makes a suggestion, and she says, I think it's better this way, all he's hearing is, I'm not good enough. If I'm not good enough, and I can't even get her to do what it is I want her to do, she doesn't love me. And that's where it starts. Now, if she doesn't love me, see, because I'm supposed to be the fixer. I'm the one who's supposed to be fixing stuff in this joint, not you, the woman. If all of a sudden you're doing my job, then I'm redundant. Now, if I take the back seat, it means you've relegated me in a place where I can only cause mischief. So what does he do in response? He tries to control. So you've got this woman who was everything, the full package. She's come in, and all of a sudden, nothing she does is good anymore. She used to be everything. All of a sudden, we're finding faults with all the things that she is doing. But because she loves you, or because she loves you and I, Lambert, she believes us. She doesn't think we would want to manipulate her, because that is the nature of women's love. And I say this with a caveat. In general, when women love, they truly love. And when they turn on you, they truly do. Unlike men, who are kind of ephemeral, they will do things for the fun of it. In fact, they will go extramarital. They will run other relationships, not because they mean anything to them, simply because, oh, well, they want to test their ability, see if they can still pull. See, because don't forget that growing up, especially within the African context, for a relationship to happen, a man had to do the talking. True?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
When that relationship broke up and a new one had to ensue, he would have to do
The
talking. Another session. Now, depending on how often a man gets into a relationship and how many women he dates, that is how many times he's going to have to court or articulate his interest. What we practice is who we become. We become sympathetic. At some point, it gains a certain meaning within us. And at the time, I think the word we called it, was strongness. And so you would realize that you grow up doing things which give you a certain value. They help you validate yourself. They give you a certain sense of internal self-worth, but you don't realize it. So when you go out on that rampage, you don't even realize what you're doing and or why. Because these things, again, are addictive. They are meeting a need. Your need for what? Significance. So you're not going out there playing with these other women because you love them. You just want to know that you've got a certain power to exercise that authority and you have not lost it. So you're using and abusing these other women and they confuse it for love. And that is how the cycle goes completely awry. Meanwhile, the woman who truly loves you identifies weaknesses within you. Not weaknesses in her eyes, they are weaknesses in your eyes, because in the woman's eyes, she sees potential and she wants you to become the jewel that you were designed to be. See, before she married you, she saw all that potential. I don't know whether we men know how to define potential. Did you want to say something there?
Absolutely. I wanted to give you a real break because that's a lot you just packed into the session, and I think it's really great. But one of the most fundamental things you just mentioned there, which is countercultural, is the fact that men are naive and women are ignorant. And it's on the basis of that most of the problems we are facing. I find it fascinating just listening to you state that when a woman gets married to a man, she sees a lot of potential in the man. And all she's trying to tell the man is, let's actualize this potential. And I'm wondering whether the potential is just in the man. Does the man not see potential in the woman too? Okay, so is this just the man seeing the woman seeing the potential in the man? And therefore, like you said, the man is the head, the woman, and I found that again strange that you didn't say the woman is the heart, you said the woman is the neck, and there is no head without a neck, isn't it? So just too many things there. And you know, that concept which I want you to really harp on now is this concept of strength, because that's where we started off with. You know, it's a man's conception of strength. What does it mean to be a strong man? You just, again, the issue of extramarital relationships, which we for people may just be something, oh, I'm not getting what I'm supposed to get from home, therefore I have to go out. But it's like we are actualizing our conception of what it means to be a strong man. The many women you are able to go out with makes you a strong man. And I find that really, really fascinating. So I want you to touch on those two, just that conception of strength, okay? And then we can get back to the thing of vulnerability. The other thing, I said two things, strength and the issue of the woman seeing in a man potential. What does the man see in the woman?
So we started by saying the man is naive, by and large. If you're naive, you're too blinded, typically by that which you pursue, that which you think is going to make you. So you have this man who's working so hard to achieve because they think that's what's going to make them powerful. They think that's what's going to give them value. And for as long as you're on that rampage, for as long as you're down that perilous path, there will be what I call cognitive dissonance. So you will be living in a parallel world to your wife or from your wife. Because the things that will matter to you are not the things that necessarily matter to her. Am I making sense?
Absolutely.
Okay, so this strength becomes defined by all the things that are external and none of the things that are intrinsic to who we are, the energy that we carry on the inside, the substance that really truly defines us. You see, because strength is not a function of muscle. Since you love the word heart and you brought it into the equation, strength is a function of heart. The ability to say, honey, I love you. Honey, I was wrong. Forgive me. Now that is strength. I don't know how many men feel free and comfortable saying that to their wives or to their girlfriends, to their spouses, or to their relationships, to their close relations. Honey, I love you. I got it wrong. Forgive me. I won't do it again. Now that is strength. And notice it has nothing to do with what car you drive, what house you live in, what paycheck you've got. In fact, for most men, there's an inverse proportionality. The more of these ephemeral things we collect, these trophies we collect, the harder it becomes for us to say sorry. Because we think we can buy our way through things. And then we are surprised when eventually we lose our wives or we lose our significant other. Because we took them so much for granted, thinking that a present or a dinner was going to solve all problems. The problem with women as well here is when they love, like I said, they become ignorant because they don't see. And it's generic. It's general to men and women. And I do not mean this. I need to put this disclaimer out. I use these words very carefully. I do not mean them in a derogatory way. In fact, I mean every last one of these words in a positive way, because every last one of these behaviors has got positive intent. You've got the man who naively wants to impress his wife, and you've got the woman who ignorantly wants to empower the husband. What do I mean by this? So the woman is all believing, because men and women, we don't see the world as it is. We tend to see the world as we are. And like I said, our behaviors in any setting have all have positive intent. Protect, provide, or prevent. And so to meet our needs in a specific way and in a big way, to bring us to that place of enlightenment and eventually self-actualization. Now, for women, when they are in love, they believe that the man as well is in love. So when I tell my spouse, you're not doing this right, and really I'm coming from a place of vulnerability, she doesn't see that. She doesn't know that I just want to have one over her because she corrected me 2 days ago and made me feel ridiculous. And so when I tell her this is not right, why don't you do it this way? She may know intuitively that what she's doing is correct. But because she trusts me, she tries to make a change. The more of that change she makes, the more she feeds into my weaknesses. And my weakness is that drive to want to control her. Because when I control her, it's almost like I've conquered her and I'm the boss. That is that weakness that I'm talking about. But conversely, to the man, that is strength. I've got my woman under control. And this is not just limited to Africa. It's a human condition. Because men tend to feel vulnerable unless, of course, they have gone past these weaknesses, unless they've gone past their fears, because at the root of this whole thing is fear, the fear of not being good enough. And so let's go back to the woman. You tell her, oh, she's not doing this right. She takes your word for it and makes amends because she's trying to be the ideal wife for you. Because her only objective is to build a home, not a house. Because when you brought her, or when you started, you both had a house. Someone has to transform it into a home, and that is the warmth that you feel when you come into an abode. Now, she wants to do whatever it takes, which means she'll sacrifice all she's got, including and not limited to her identity, to make of that environment a home. So when you start telling her this is wrong or that is not right, she makes amends. She tries to correct these things. But of course, we realize that is not true in and of itself. It's just control. So what really are you doing? Slowly, you deconstruct your wife. Slowly, you chip away the fabric of the identity of that person that you fell in love with because she's trying to become something else. She's responding to your whims and your caprices, moving away from all the perks and all the pearls that she brought into that marriage because she's trying to fit into something, some mold that you're creating, you the man. But again, all you want to do is control. So you don't realize what you're doing when you find faults in places where there are no problems whatsoever. What happens in that case? Over time, she becomes somebody else because now she's confused. Nothing is right anymore. She tries this, it doesn't work. She tries this other bit, it doesn't work. She gets frustrated, she curls up, she cries, sleepless nights. But of course, she puts a strong front because she needs to be strong for her man and for her family. How much of that can she take? Eventually, she will pine and break. So she continues down this perilous path and eventually becomes something or somebody else. And now you, the man, have got a real reason to complain because your wife is missing in the shadows somewhere. Now you start finding faults. You put out real complaints and she gets even more confused. Because now she actually realized she's become someone else, but she's so far gone, she can't remember who she was anymore. That is when she typically gets frustrated and we have a conflict situation where she starts fighting back. Then you have the typical love and exchanges where Those little things that used to be cute. Oh, he left the toilet seat up. Oh, it was so cute. Now you do that, it's a problem. Why? So you have all these smokes and mirrors. You have smoke and you have fire. You try to put out where you think there is a problem. You don't realize that whatever it is that comes to the table is really not the problem. The problem is someplace else. And why does this happen? Because these two people have become so vulnerable that they can't dare express what the real issue is. Why? For fear of not being good enough, for fear of being seen as not being good enough. The man doesn't want to be weak. He doesn't want to be seen as weak. The woman doesn't want to feel rejected. And then that spirals out of control. What was the second thing you wanted me to talk about?
So just before we get into that, because again, that is really, as always, you packed that. I really wanted to welcome a couple of people. Again, Ait and Gang, thank you for showing up. My friend Edward and classmate Ake from Boston. Just a couple of comments for you, Bika, and a question. Haiti Awambeng, wisdom here. I love this, she said. Edward, this is amazing. Words of compassion and love are the most common denominator in our spiritual and physical experiences. And this is from my brother and friend, Innocent Chia. Is it possible that a modern-day African is at odds, fitting into a world where his cultural values and nature have been decimated and made anathema? That most of Africa, prior to Christianity, was polygamous and not monogamous? Do you want to take a stab at that?
Yes, absolutely. So this is part of the problem again, and this is where we talked about, cool. So is it possible that the African is at odds fitting into a world where his cultural values, I love the whole concept of cultural values, and I'd like to talk to that as well, to speak to that particular point as well, and nature have been decimated and made anathema. That most of Africa prior to Christianity was polygamous and not monogamous. So, Inochia, that's an amazing question. And let's take that and let's really pick that apart and deconstruct it. I want to start by saying the following. Words are neither the best conveyors nor the best purveyors of meaning. I'll say that again. Words are neither the best purveyors nor conveyors of meaning. So you would realize that a word does its absolute best to capture an experience born of feeling, which is a dynamic continuum, a field, so to speak. And so it captures that and represents it in meaning, tries to translate and articulate it in a form of meaning, something that people can understand. So in the best case scenario, words are defective. If we could communicate through feelings, we wouldn't have problems. You talked about cultural values. There is absolutely no cultural value that is more important than the concept of love. And I'm sure, Chia, I'm sure you would agree with me that if you love, then everything else stacks up. Why do I say so? Love is the most powerful word on the planet. Unfortunately, it has been used and abused. It gets even more dire because the English language has got just one word for so many different renditions of love. But what does love do? When two people fall in love, they procreate. So love will procreate. Love will create from absolutely nothing. And remember, I talked about nothingness and hailed it as everything, because from a place of nothingness, what you've got is potential. Look at this space, for instance. You would notice that within this space of nothingness, which is emptiness, we have a lot of potential. It can expand, it can contract, it can be wider, it can be deeper, and so on and so forth. So it can take so many shapes and show so many forms from a place of absolute nothingness. So when two business partners, for instance, and I'll bring this to culture, two business partners who really are moved by the fulfillment that their calling brings. I'd like us to talk about fulfillment, but that may be a conversation for some other time. But we all have a purpose. And when you find your purpose and find someone who shares in your purpose, and you get into a business with that person, you will succeed by leaps and bounds, and nothing will stand in your way. So love procreates, love creates, love heals, of course. You see, because the way I talk, the way we're talking to our audience, to our audience right now, that ability to connect, that ability to relate, that ability to be patient, which is what love is. You'll notice that with, what's the word I'm looking for? With unconditional patience, there's no room for misunderstanding because I get to understand where you're coming from. I see what you mean, why you mean it that way, and we can agree to disagree respectfully. Although best case scenario, we will always come to a middle ground, find consensus if we're going in the same direction. Because I believe in the concept of ultimate truth, as opposed to your version of the truth and my version of the truth. Now let's come to cultural values. What are these cultural values again? Now this speaks to what I've just articulated. I know it took long, but you notice cultural values mean absolutely nothing until we give them meaning. So nothing means anything until we ascribe meaning to it. Some of our cultural values are depraved. Some of our cultural values are to be lauded and applauded. What makes that cultural value worth its weight in gold and salt? It is the simple question. Is it building synergy or is it rendering chaos? And that is what would define those cultures. What's the point sticking to cultural values if they did not serve a people? Let's come now to polygamy. Did polygamy really serve us? Now, if it served us, if it allowed us to live in a community in a way that synergies were built and everyone had respect for every other one, and men did not have to kill other men for women and all of that, and women did not come fighting for right of what? I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure how that setup would typically work. But if it worked and it worked perfectly for that environment, then of course it makes it sensible. It is something to keep. You would notice again that with changing times, the situation changes. So back in the day, within the African culture, it was customary for the men to go out and hunt and for the women to stay at home and cook and nurture. They are naturally nurturing creatures. So if you look at that dynamic, fast track to today, it's not exactly the same thing. We deal in a world, now we live in a world where the jungle for what it was back then, where the men used to go to hunt, is your corporate organ today. So they would go hunting. It would be a period of anxiety, there'd be stress, there'd be adrenaline, cortisol. You are in survival mode and you're careful. You know that one false move, things could go wrong. But once you came out of that environment, you receded to the confines and safety of your home. And then you could celebrate with how many ever wives you had. And they would then come together to ensure that you were happy. And that may have been the culture. Those may have been the customs. Today, we're living in a world and in a situation where everybody wants to self-actualize. And that is what we are called to be. We're called to be the best we can be with the gifts and talents that we have. Now, if we're not exercising these talents and growing and becoming spiritually more evolved, then we are receding. So we're either growing or we are dying. There's no stagnating. Some would say in the world today, in order to be at a standstill, you need to be jogging. And I believe that is so true. So you would realize that the dynamic has changed so much. I would like for us to shift from this concept of our culture for what it was. Has it been decimated? Who decimates it? Only we can decimate it. I can't have power over you until you give me authority over you. So are we embracing things that will dilute our culture, or are we embracing values that will enrich that culture? It all comes back down to us. Yes.
So thank you very much, BK. That's deep. And I think that's a long conversation that we have to get into. I thank you, Brian. Innocent. I just wanted to highlight Diane Daiga is on. That's my friend. She says, great points, Coach B. Let me put that for you to see that. That's Diane. And she says, quoting you, nothing means nothing until you ascribe a meaning. And following up on the conversation, in some cases, the polygamous men had multiple wives to do the farming, while the men went hunting or simply controlled what came in from the farm. So I guess there is no there's no one solution. There's no one form of polygamy in the context in which we describe it, isn't it? That the man had to go out hunting in order to come back to this. I think that's the point she's making. And Kwame says,
can we just go back to what Diane said? Because it's a very important point. So you would notice that what Diane said is akin to your corporate structure of today. That was a corporate organ at the time, like Microsoft. But then they were in farming. So you had the entire business. The man goes out hunting. The wives go out to the farm, and that is the community. And they ran their business that way. They shared what they could eat, shared with the rest of the family, sold the rest of the proceeds, and life went on. So you notice it served a purpose. It was a vehicle towards survival, enlightenment, and self-actualization. Because again, they had all these folk tales that they would tell at night or in the evenings around the fireplace, where those values would transcend generations.
So BK, I think that we are getting off into this struggle between monogamy, polygamy, and culture. But I wanted to bring us back into something important that you said about, and I mean, for me, the main takeaway today has been men are naive and women are ignorant, okay, in a very good sense, isn't it? Because you said the man who naively wants to impress the wife and the woman who ignorantly wants to empower the man, isn't it? And that's the context of the conversation. And within this context, you also mentioned the fact that the reason, I mean, I'm not going to say the reason, there's something in the subconscious in our definition of strength for the man. What does it mean to be a powerful man? It is exhibited by men trying to go out and conquer more women, which is where the polygamous thing came out, and we are looking at that. But take that back in terms of the strength, within that conversation of strength and the relationship with the woman, the breakdown that is leading us to where we are finding that a lot of men are struggling. Okay, how do we get out of that dynamic? How do we address this issue of strength between the man and the woman in this context?
I'll give you a practical example, and it comes down to vulnerability. So it comes down to our ability to be vulnerable. It comes down to our ability to accept ourselves the way we are, not the way we hope to be in 3 years or in 4 or 5 years before we can get to accept ourselves, because that will never happen. I wanted to give an example. So 2 women, total strangers, walk into the restroom and they come out as best friends. That happens every day. The women will tell you that. Conversely, 2 men who are good friends, almost best friends, walk into the restroom, and if you saw them in there, you would thought they were strangers, total strangers. You see, there is a certain mindset There are certain things, this whole concept of communication. The woman at all times wants to bond. She wants to relate. It doesn't matter where she is. It doesn't matter what the circumstances are. Generally, of course, they are nurturing. They are the ones who carry children. So their molecular makeup, their biological and biochemical makeup, their whole physiology is geared towards nurturing. Whereas the man is all about conquest. And that's a subliminal message that has been passed down, handed down to men from generation to generation. So it becomes the proverbial unwritten rule. And this conquest articulates and manifests in so many different ways. I mean, the woman going out and starting other, having extracurricular relationships is just one little piece of the puzzle. But then it's the whole question of dominance, dominating and being domineering. And until we men realize that this energy is counterproductive because it shuns and pushes away the very people we want to pull towards us, until we come to that realization, we will be lost and we will destroy our relationships without even realizing we're doing so. And it takes the woman to realize that even if the man is physically stronger, which tends to be the case, physiologically stronger, which tends to be the case, the fact that the man has got a weakness for a woman then puts that man's strength at the disposal of the woman. And that's why I say women are ignorant, because they don't understand the power that they carry deep within. The power to make, shake, move. The power to aspire, the power to motivate, the power to inspire, the power to drive things. Women know that they have that intuitively. But until something called love comes in the way, gets in the way, then they compromise all these things because they don't want their man to be comfortable. So they start trying to be something else for the sake of peace. I think that is the expression that a lot of our mothers used back in the day. And these are the principles that we need to move away from. And what does this do? So when you have this dynamic, obviously it sows the seeds of dissension. Communication is the first thing that is taken hostage. And obviously, if there's no communication, then misunderstandings will flourish. Communication is the only thing that gets two people who are diametrically opposed to each other find common ground. And until we, the men, realize that we only need to find one thing that we have in common with our spouses, focus on that and grow it. It will grow organically and become so big. It will expand at the behest of our love for our spouse and at the expense of our differences, which will shrink as a consequence. It takes a lot of strength to do that. I come back to the words, sweetheart, I had it wrong. I made a mistake here. I'm sorry, I won't do it again. If as a man, you can't say that to your wife, we need to have a conversation.
But BK, just before you let me just, while I agree with that, the problem is when you say you won't do it again, and down the road it happens again and you apologize and it becomes, every time, I'm tired of this, I'm sorry, isn't it? When the woman starts saying, I'm tired of this, I'm sorry, what else can you do?
So there are two things there. A lot of the time, when a woman says, I'm tired of this, I'm sorry, she's not told you what she really wanted to say to you. She's not really said what the issue was. And if you say you won't do something again, and you go out and you do it, then it begs the question, what were you thinking when you said it? You see, that is part of that abuse. And we men are prone to, well, generally it's a human weakness. We're prone to it. When we believe or we realize that we can use the word sorry as a panacea. If it goes wrong, I'll throw a sorry in there. I don't particularly mean it, but it gets out of my chest, gets out of my back. It is one thing to say, okay, hey, I've got a weakness here. I'm working on it. If you're going to say you're sorry, great, say it. And besides, when I say I'm sorry, what exactly does it mean? See, because there are certain things we should not even be saying we're sorry for. If it was an accident, I did not know what I was doing, so it happened accidentally. I stepped on your toes. Okay, cool. I'm sorry. I cheated on you. I'm sorry. It was a mistake. Really?
Yeah, so I get it. I mean, the way I want to put the emphasis on is the fact that, so there are two things.
Yes.
The man manipulating the woman with the use of the word sorry, isn't it? Just throwing it in there in order to and then come back to it. But then there are instances where you are really, it's like a weakness that you're working to overcome, isn't it? And you might not have known it, even though the woman has pointed this out to you. And so you want to work and say, yes, I'm sorry. I'm working on it. Does that mean it may not happen? I'm going to try. It can be for something like cheating. Cheating cannot be a weakness. I don't know. I may be exaggerating that, but I'm saying there are certain things which people say sorry in order to be given the opportunity to continue working and improving. I don't know whether it's the case that we men just take advantage of the word sorry, or that there are people who genuinely say I'm sorry and repeat the same mistakes, and the woman says, I'm fed up with this sorry. I don't want it anymore.
I totally hear you. And this is where mindset kicks in. You see, we all have certain needs. We want to be safe, we want to be secure, we want to be comfortable. We want a bit of variety in life. We want to be respected, we want to feel significant. We want love and connection. We want to grow, and we want to give back to society, to the community. Now, depending on where we are, you would notice that in spite of these needs, now some of these needs we meet in positive ways, and other of these needs we meet in negative ways. I'll tell you a story that will put this all in perspective, especially for the men who go, especially for us men who sometimes play with fire and we don't realize what we're doing. So when any behavior that meets 2 or 3 of our needs, we will get addicted to that behavior. As you can see back there, there's a guitar. Now, if I'm getting stressed, which is not very often, I pick up the guitar and it calms me down. So I'm addicted to that guitar because it meets a certain need. It meets my need to connect with myself and to feel fulfilled. And usually when I'm in that place and headspace, I think clearly. So I get addicted to it. That's a positive addiction. Think about the person who, when under duress, the best way they can deal with it is to try and push it to the side. That's where alcohol kicks in. Anything to get away, to move away from that pain. I call it the pain-pleasure principle, or Anthony Robbins calls it the pain-pleasure principle. We do everything to move towards pleasure, and we do everything to avoid pain. So we may be avoiding pain by doing the wrong things, but for as long as it meets that need, even if it's the need for significance, which is where we become abusive, where we insult people, we shout, because it gives us a false sense of control. We think we've got it together because when we do that, people sit up, people listen to us. No different from Facebook. You put a post out there and you get all these likes. You get addicted to it because it moves something within you. It releases endorphins. It releases serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin. So as we go through this, we will cover so many subjects. We'll talk about spirituality. We'll talk about psychology. We'll talk about talking therapy. We'll talk about philosophy. We'll talk about biology. We'll talk about molecular biochemistry. We'll talk about, you name it. It will cut across so many domains. But so that's what pretty much happens at that level. You have this man who's struggling to meet certain needs and he's gotten addicted. to a certain behavior because it meets a need. So he meets that need through negative filters. Now, let me give you an example from my own life. I play the guitar, obviously. Now, I have a friend who plays another musical instrument, and we met through music. So we started playing music, and it was just amazing. Over time, you get used to that high. It is so powerful. It's like the world comes to an end. It's a bit like what happens when I'm in an engagement, a strategic intervention with, I don't call people clients, I call them partners. When we're having a conversation, exchanging energies and building synergies, I'm in a completely different zone. And that in and of itself is addictive in a good way. Now it gets to a certain point and you realize that this person is not available to play music with you. For whatever reason, they may have gotten busy and all. But then you need that so badly. And that's when you realize that, hang on a minute, what you thought was an interest in music, you had translated that to the person. And so you start missing the person. Why are you missing the person? Because obviously you can't fall in love or you can't love the musical instrument that they are playing. You go back to the person that elicits that thing that you feel on the inside, that sense of fulfillment. Now notice that this was 100% innocent. It was an engagement, it was an interaction. But then you form this connection and it becomes so strong at some point there is an attachment. I call attachment the weed in the relationship. We are all called upon to pry ourselves from that weed or to remove the weeds in the relationship. I will explain what I mean by that. But so you see, I got to a point where this connection had taken a life of its own. And I needed to have this person around to play music. And sometimes just a conversation with them now without the music was equally almost just as good because that felt like music. So you realize that sometimes you start something in a platonic way and you think you're just having fun. And then it takes a life of its own. And believe me, that energy can be so toxic. It can become so strong that it would fight even you if you tried to pry yourself away from it. And that is where growth begins. So, did we understand that there's no way we could have jeopardized what we had in our friendship by compromising the relationship and taking it into something else? Absolutely. Were families involved? Absolutely. So these are things that you instinctively just know based on your values. And again, this is where values are very important. So you're not chasing the pleasures, you're chasing higher values. And this is where, in the face of such challenges, we're called upon to come up higher. See, this is spiritual growth, and that is strength in all its facets. You see, because you can give into that temptation, and giving into it once makes it easier for you to give into it a second time. You get that value, you get that satisfaction. Before long, you become addicted. Then it is one, then it is the next, then it is the other, and so it becomes you.
I'm happy you brought everything back to where we started off with strength. And if you ask my opinion, I think that has been the most, call it the theme for our session of today, talking about strength, which is something that I really want us to delve into. But there are two things. Let me talk about this. First, there's Kwame. Kwame asked, is this from research or from experience? You are expressing echoes exactly what I have come to believe from experience. I think that was talking about the cultural values and all that. But then Innocent came back and said, The Bible says for women to be submissive to the husband and for the husband to love their wives. There is a case to be made that our misunderstanding of these terms and roles is at the heart of havoc in our homes. To the point that BK has spoken to, husbands are to love their wives to the point of submission. She submits to the love of the husband, not to his muscle or abuse. And Diane,
Can I just throw something to that? So we deal. Let's just go back to that last comment. I just want to add one thing to it. Yes, I love this. Not to the muscle or abuse. I would add to that the following. It is the woman's responsibility to ensure that her man is growing. And if you're not doing that as a woman, you're failing woefully.
how is that?
As in, where the man tries to muscle or abuse you because you're highlighting areas in their lives that have got shortcomings, obviously the way he would retort is to throw a punch, is to point to your own weaknesses and show you that you're no better. Oh, what about this thing that you did the other day? And by the way, that's how you are. Or whatever it is we typically would say to shut someone down. I just want to add to that by saying it is part of the woman's responsibility to ensure that her husband is growing. Because if your husband asks you to do something that is wrong and you do it because the Bible says submit to your husband, then I think you did not really understand what submit meant. Submission means love, unconditional. The example I usually give to some of the people I talk to is the following. As a woman, you have a child, obviously. And I would ask them, so when your child does something wrong, what do you do? Or your child is throwing a tantrum, what do? You correct that child, right? They say yes. And that's because you love the child. Is that a fair point to make? They go, yeah, of course. When your husband does the exact same thing, how do you behave? Do you correct him or do you give him a massage and pamper him and say, oh, well done, darling. It's all right, sweetheart, don't worry. They start laughing. And I'm like, so why do you discriminate? Are you saying you love your child more than you love your husband?
And I think that's a conversation that we have another session, because I have seen the inversion of roles where women now tend to love their children more than their husbands because the children have replaced their husbands. They need more care than the husbands, isn't it?
And that is child abuse, because they are depending on their kids for love. So putting their children under pressure to be who they are not. So the child becomes the parent.
That's interesting. Well, along the same lines, Diane says, I agree that there are nuances in how both men and women understand love and submission in a marriage. Okay? If both parties are not on the same page, then issues arise because some choose to focus on isolated segments of the quote that favors them.
I love that. Should I speak to that briefly before we move to the next comment?
Yes, Diane has something. She's reacting to what you said earlier on. But go ahead.
Okay. Can you just bring it up again? I'd just like to read one more time, the last part. Choose to focus on isolated segments of the quota that favor them. Okay.
Yeah, so I think she's just referencing the fact that men will want to just talk about the submission part and will not want to talk about it in terms of the love. At least I'm talking from the part of a man, isn't it? The women will always say, says submit, but when we actually mean of the men are talking about the submission and not understanding that it means love. And I think it's also vice versa. The women also understanding in a different context, asking the men to do. But go ahead.
No, absolutely. No, what you said is exactly what it is. But then it brings us back to that whole concept of strength. See, because the only reason the man would behave that way is because he's in his comfort zone. He wants to stay where he knows he will be strong and he will feel strong, where he can express and show his manhood and articulate his authority. If you take him to his vulnerabilities, the places where he is weak, He feels less of a man, and he doesn't want to go. He doesn't want to go there, and obviously that will happen at the expense of the relationship.
So Diane reacts again to your thing about the woman being responsible for the growth of the husband, and she says that's a huge burden to be responsible for the growth of a husband. So okay.
Yes, no. I want to take that back.
Mm-hmm.
She is accountable to the husband. She is responsible to herself. Thank you very much, Diane. That is very important, because it is important that we do not put the burden of responsibility for a happy marriage and a successful union on the woman. It is true that she has the power. The only person that can really change a man is his spouse. And when I talk about changing, it doesn't mean you go and change him. And Diane, this is going to speak a whole lot to the point that you raised. See, because when I talk about you being responsible for his growth, all I mean is that you need to be responsible enough to be who you are, circumstances irrespective, not compromise on your values. Love him, respect him, give him his food if that's what you typically do, but don't say how high when he asks you to jump if he's asking you to jump off a cliff. That's all I mean. And you would notice that in the world, you don't need to go out there and control anything or anyone. The moment you try to control something, someone, a situation, or a circumstance, you lose control. That happens when you lose control and you break in the process. But if you can control yourself and be who you are unapologetically, accept what you will accept, say no to what you will not accept, and provide alternative solutions, you will notice that eventually the world bends over backwards and becomes the change that you have become. So it will mirror you. These are spiritual laws. Nobody can resist them. And just to add to your point, Diane, this is something I will say to all you women who are listening to us today, especially the ones who are discouraged because they can never get their man to go for counseling. If you enter into an engagement that helps you fully understand yourself and you can embrace and be that self, understand what your values are, subscribe to those values, and live them to the letter, it will change all your relationships, including your man, if he loves you. You see, because what we all fail to realize, and this cuts across the board, is if I'm a knight in shining armor, not by my outward appearance, rather by my values, as in, I do things because they are the right things to do. I never act in retaliation, which means I respond at all times. I never react when I can help it. That also means whenever there is a conflict, it's almost like who I am, my attitude and my behavior is holding a mirror in front of you. So I give you a reputation to live up to. You can choose to live up to that reputation, or you can stay in the mud where you are. If all you want to do is pick a fight, I don't fight with you. I will tell you, hey, honey, I will move away now, not because I disrespect you. It's just because I realize you're not in a place where you can talk. When you're ready for us to talk and have a constructive conversation, a progressive, a productive conversation, I will be at your beck and call. So I'll move away. I'll go do this other thing, which can help you and I move this family to where it needs to be. And you recuse yourself. There is no way that can go wrong. He may prounce, he may trounce, he may shout, but when you leave and he's with himself, he will beat his chest and say, I've got a woman. And the next time, slowly you will realize that he will start responding to you as opposed to reacting. And if the light that you carry within you is way too bright for him, then he may move away. In which case, don't compromise on who you are. Because if he truly loves you, he will stick and stand by you. If you need to compromise on who you are for him to stay with you, That is the point where you start self-abuse. And like I said, no one can abuse you until you give them the right, the power, and the authority to do so. Yes, Lambert.
So I think we intended this to go for 1 hour. We have gone over 1 hour, 30 minutes, and knowing you, we could go on for the next 3 hours. I really want to thank you, but I want to give you the opportunity to give some closing comments and just to say, if you are listening, you're watching, and you have loved the conversation, why not take a date with us every Monday? Invite brothers, husbands, friends. This is not just for men, it's for all of us, for our community. Our focus today has been on our understanding of strength. What does it mean for a man? What does strength mean? And I love the word, the way Innocent put it, not muscle. Okay, it's not the abuse. But then, any last words, BK?
I think we've covered everything we really wanted to cover today. The idea was to go with the flow, talk about so many different things, go in so many different directions, and hopefully just build consensus. Get people to a place where they feel comfortable to engage. Engage, don't be afraid to discover who you are. Don't be afraid to find yourself, because that is where fulfillment is. See, because when we enjoy what we do, when we're driven by our purpose, then there's absolutely no cause for us to be distressed. There's no cause for us to be stressed to the point where we become depressed. And I think I would like to leave it at that for now, and look forward to seeing you all next week.
So thank you very much, BK. And again, you talked a lot about vulnerability today. I would like for us to pick that up next Monday. If there are there are issues that you want us to address on this segment of our show. Like I said, it comes up every Monday, same time, same channel. You can send me an email. You can also subscribe to my YouTube channel, which is just my name, just Lambert Bomb on YouTube. You get there. And the one thing that I wanted to offer also without his permission is go to Facebook and type Mindset Boulevard. Mindset Boulevard. And if you want to have a session with Coach BK, he's always available. You'll be able to address that. That is why we have him, and we are taking this commitment every Monday to talk about issues in particular that affect men and mental health. We started off today talking about strength. First of all, showing up as nothing, show up as nothing, and the building up our identity and our understanding of what it means to be a strong man. We leave you with what BK said, which I think is very, very insightful. Men are naive and women are ignorant, and we can follow up with this next week. Once again, thank you all, and it's been a great evening. I wish you the best. See you next week, same time, same channel. Have a good evening.
Thank you.